So this is Calandra Corners. My name is Joseph Sciorra, and I'm very, very happy to have with me a dear friend, colleague, and sister folklorist, Luisa Del Giudice. So welcome, Luisa.
Nice to be here, really, even in this virtual way, although I miss you all in New York and our folklore buddies at the American Folklore Society.
Yeah, we're all hoping that it's all going to be on track a year from now, if not
We
sooner.
sure do. Yeah, and I am looking forward to getting my vaccine so I can get on with my traveling life, which is really hard not to travel.
Yeah.
Anyway, do I need to introduce myself? I don't think
Yeah,
so.
tell us, for those who don't know you, like I do, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you've done in the past, and then we'll get to the topic at hand.
I'm an independent scholar. I call myself a folklorist, ethnologist, and oral historian for different contexts. And I started out in literature and then discovered folklore and oral history and sort of never turned back. Did work with oral culture and oral history, basically beginning with folk song in Italy, and then in North America. And that's what my dissertation was on, a tragic ballad in sociocultural context. But, once you get into folklore, one thing leads to another. And then you're doing work on gastronomic utopias and St. Joseph's tables and, architecture and everything else. And this last project really took me by surprise. And I'm deep into it, down the rabbit hole, along with Laura Ruberto. It's Italian prisoners of war. She's studying those in America who are much better off. And I'm looking into suddenly, and it happened, I had a sleepless night the night before Veterans Night. And, none of us are sleeping with COVID, with the elections, which I've taken very seriously, and everything else. And I was up till 2 a.m, November 11th, 2020, reading about, I finally had a name to give to my father and what he was during the war. And that turned out to be an IMI, Internati Militari Italiani, military internees. And so he had told us, I'm the family documentarian. Even before I became a folklorist, I've always been interested in the family history, family stories, proverbs, you name it, nicknames, whatever. And I had interviews with my father back in the 80s, 85, 88, 94. I've got them all in my closet. And one of the things that we've all been doing during COVID is hunkering down, living in our homes and exploring different parts of our homes, right? And our families and our histories. And I've been sorting through photo archives, having them digitized, sound archives, multimedia archives, interviews. And so it suddenly occurred to me that I didn't know really much about my father's war years. And he was, as most soldiers are, reluctant to tell the full stories to their families. It's always other people who find out what your family member was doing during the war. And
so let's backtrack a sec.
Sure.
So just for a little personal information. So you're talking about your father, who was a soldier in the Italian army during World War II. And before we get there, so tell us a little bit about your own migration and his migration story.
Sure. So we are from Terracina, Basso Lazio, provincia di Latina, province of Latina. And my father's family were contadini. They had vineyards and they grew grapes. And my mother's family was artigiani, painting houses and friezes along the corners and all. And, the war years kind of devastated that part of Italy, and there was really not much to be done. They were literally going hungry despite the fact that they had fields, and then he became a fisherman. And so they emigrated. He went to Canada, to Toronto, 1956, early on, because he had a brother there. And then we arrived, the three of us sisters, one was born in Canada, with my mother alone, on a ship at Naples, and arrived in Halifax And then it was a 2-day trip by train to Toronto. So this was a woman who had never even gone 100 kilometers from Terracina, taking this solo trip with 3 kids. And I mean, I can't even imagine what that was like, but I try to ask those questions and piece it together. And I think I've been piecing these stories together most of my life, kind of obsessed by them and trying to figure it out, the meaning of it and what exactly happened and why it happened, right? So we ended up in Toronto, and that's where I grew up. Then I, went back to Italy to study, then came to UCLA to do my PhD, and here I am.
In Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles.
So your dad was a soldier during the war.
Yeah.
And what happened? So for those who are not familiar with the history of World War II as it pertains to Italy and the Italian soldiers.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is I wasn't acquainted with World War II, and I studiously avoid topics about war. And I think I either inherited that or just constitutionally, I can't stand war stories, not war movies, not war novels, not any of that. I can't handle it. And yet here I am during COVID listening to 55 hours of War and Peace. And I was shocked to discover that they're actually talking about the war, maneuvers, all of the rest of it. And so my father was at age 17, volunteered, per le armi, and then became a regular soldier. He was in Piacenza, and then he ended up in Greece. And they were there for a year, sort of policing the situation, trying to handle the partigiani, the partisans who were in the mountain areas, and could show up at any time. You didn't know who they were. And he was there for about a year, learned Greek in less than a year. He was pretty astounding that way. And then this is the tragic part that I only learned yesterday. On September 4th, 1943, he had done his duty and he was going to be sent back from Athens to Italy. 4 days later, the armistice is signed. Badoglio signs and surrenders. And immediately, former allies, the Italians, were rounded up by the Germans and given a choice, although it didn't sound like my father thought he had a choice. He didn't say anything about that. I've just learned about it. Whether they wanted to continue to fight with the Germans as allies, or they were going to be taken to prisoner of war camps, to concentration camps, forced labor camps. And that's where he was sent. He spent about a year in Zagreb, in one of the, they were doing construction. I don't know exactly what they were doing. And then to Germany, to camps in Germany, where he said the 8th of September is when the war really began for him. And just because they were considered by the Germans to be traitors, by the Italians. And this is a recent development because this was a chapter of the war that nobody wanted to deal with. The Italians, but recently, the Germans and the Italians got together, I think in the 2008, and decided that this was un luogo della memoria that had to be told. And they started to work together, the governments, and decided that they would start telling this story, creating museums and archives. And so it's a very recent thing. We didn't know about it because Italians didn't really know about it either. And so he was a prisoner, but Hitler was very clever. He wouldn't call them prisoners of war. They called them internees. And this was the first time they'd used this term. Why? Because then the Geneva Convention did not apply to them.
Right.
And that they could be exploited, they could be whatever. They got no health, the Red Cross, forget it. Human rights, forget it. So it was pretty savvy and strategic. And so he was in these war camps. Luckily, he was one who was driving these small trains with carts that were transporting cement because they were building an airfield. And he told me about the airplanes that they were built for needed 3 kilometers to land and to take off. So this is what they were working on. And then the Allies, one day he was doing this work, was on the binari back and forth. And he was working with the German Jew, a young guy with him, and waiting his turn to unload. And this guy says, well, I'm going to go have lunch. So, you stay and continue to work. Within 10 minutes, he was back, indiavolato, just rushing back, saying the sirens are going, we're going to be attacked, there's going to be explosions, bombings, you've got to get away. And so my dad drove on these tracks as far as he could go and then got off and started running. And he said, the bombardments came, I was buried 3 times under the earth. And when he went back to the camp after the bombing had ended, of the 20,000 prisoners, workers who were there, only 1,000 remained.
Yeah.
So he was one of the lucky ones, I guess. So that was his story.
So when you were interviewing him, this was not something that you were focused on at the time. When you go back listening to the tapes that you did how many years ago, are there in your mind, are you asking, saying, oh, I wish I could have asked him this, I wish I should have asked him that? And
because I was just interested in recording stories, I kind of followed all paths, and just kept asking questions about this, about that, about the land. Where did they have land in Terracina? Oh, tell me about the war. Tell me about immigration. It's all there. And I can't encourage people enough. And this is one of the silver linings to our Zoom age. Basically, you can get on Zoom all by yourself in your room without anyone interviewing you, and you just press record and start telling your story, because you don't know who's going to want it in the future. And I think it's sort of keeping faith with your past and passing it along. And not everyone's going to be writing memoirs, but this is something that is accessible to everyone. And I have this absolute treasure of my recordings on cassette tapes that really go back a while. And I got them digitized by a friend who is a radio announcer, and he knows how to manage all the tech. And so I'm starting to go through them and transcribing them, or at least those parts that I need now, but at least it's there as this treasure. And when my nieces and nephews, I told them, when I discovered what nonno was, an IMI, I sent them the Wikipedia article, and they were just like, oh my God, we never knew, and please continue this research. And we're eager to find out more about it. So I'm doing this not only for myself, of course, but for the entire family and beyond, because this is really one of those hidden stories, right? That like Vietnam, they came back, and it's like there was so much shame and there was so much confusion about what happened there that they didn't want to face it. And that's what this is. This is one of those stories. And I'm eager too that maybe consular offices abroad should be telling their own immigrants, about this, so that people, and it's the children and grandchildren now who are looking up these stories. And just recently, this is 2019, they are giving medals to IMIs because it's considered l'altra resistenza, the other resistance, una resistenza senza armi, a resistance without arms. Because when they said no, they took away manpower, soldier power from the regimes, the fascist Nazi regimes. And, it was a no. It was a clear no. 3/4 of them said no. The black shirts continued to fight, but they did not. And it was a form of resistance. And what happened in the camps was una scuola della democrazia. So it was a school for democracy. They had all been raised on fascist propaganda. And it was like almost like the first time many of them were exploring these ideological issues and political issues. So it was a resistance. And there are many, it's terrible because now we're in shutdown and I can't get the books that I need. So I'm ordering them at tremendous shipping costs from Italy, but there are a couple I must read. So that no library, interlibrary loan right now.
But you can, contact archives and ask them to digitize things. These archives, at least in the States, and ask them to digitize, because I've been doing that since you can't go to these various archives.
Most of them are in reduced manpower themselves, and the archives themselves are physically closed.
Right.
So there, I just discovered an archive for the Nazi persecuted, and that includes everyone from Holocaust victims to forced labor camps to prisoners of war and everything. So I've written, and they're saying, well, we're sorry, but we're kind of closed. So who knows when I'll get that. Sure. But I am starting the process, and what you need is foglio matricolare from whatever administrative. For us, it's Latina, but I have no idea if anyone's actually in the office. So this process is going to be delayed, but we'll keep at it. I've started it, and my family does want that medal. My father would not. He did not join any ex-combattenti, none of these veterans associations. He had no illusions and did not participate in any of the heroicism and patriotic talk about war. He was disgusted by it and was horrified by it. And he'd shake with rage. He'd start telling a story, and then he'd just go, "Non lo posso raccontare." I can't tell it, and I get that in the transcription. I think it's important to say that. He's shutting down, he's shaking with rage, he's crying. He can't tell this story, and so.
How are you at this stage in your work? How are you envisioning combining the sort of oral history that you collected years ago from your dad, plus the historical documentation of the war and these internees? How are you imagining getting these things to fit?
Well, this is what I've always taught, how oral history is sort of go to the man in the trench, the history from below, all the terms that we've used for oral history. And here is a fantastic example of how you can complete the historic record by putting these two things together. So I am going and doing all the traditional research. There's been reams and reams written on World War II, and then trying to put it together. I mean, it's a real puzzle, but he gave me places, he gave me dates. And so I'm putting all of that together. So I will definitely talk about the historic context. And then this is how this soldier lived that context. This was his personal experience of an historic event. And so, it really is a beautiful example of why oral history is so essential, is so important to complete that record. Because if you were only reading the historic record, you'd be getting officials' reports, and you'd be getting Mussolini and Badoglio and all that. But what was it like to be in Greece? Actually, it was pretty nice for the Italians. They were of all the occupiers, the Bulgarians had a piece of it, the Germans had a piece of it, the Italians had a piece of it. The Italians did not report the Jews. The Italians were really friendly with their cousin, the considered cousins, the Greeks. And the Germans were totally ticked off at this because they were not being ruthless enough. And, and they hated the Italians, they were not a war machine. They were just too humane, I think, in most cases, not in all, of course. But so that's what I want to tell. I want my family history to be part of the larger record. And there's just been a boom in publications on IMIs. I listened in last week at a presentation in Vicenza where Mario Avagliano and Marco Palmieri were presenting their book. And that's one of the ones I've ordered. So now I'm in touch. I'm on the Facebook pages and asking questions and gathering information. And Laura and I have already thought about a panel for the next day of AFS on POWs. So it's going forward. Yeah, it's going forward.
Well, it seems like this it is this new chapter for you, right? This new avenue of research, and it's stuff that's still working itself out. Yeah. So I hope you will, of course, keep us all apprised, us at Calandra Institute, but also us on social media and our various fora.
You know me on social media. I'm a big blabbermouth. And can I say something? Sure. I mean, Facebook has been absolutely essential to this research, really, sharing things that just kind of pop up. And it has helped me do my research as well. And it has really been wonderful. And it's not a coincidence that why is this happening now, right? Why did I start this research now? Well, beginning of November, a lot of things were going on. First of all, the calendrical, All Souls, you remember you're dead. Then there's Veterans Day. Then there's COVID shutdown. And then there are the elections. And the absolute anxiety on watching the Nazi resurgence. And you think, holy God, here we are again. Did we not learn anything? And so another generation must know these stories, and I think that was part of the motivation as well. I mean, everything came together. It was the right moment.
Yeah, and I think your point of just getting these more individual, more localized, less known stories and connecting them to larger events is really critical, both historically and even today.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm a great advocate of folklore and oral history.
Okay,
as I know you are.
Yes, of course. That's why one of the reasons why we're here, right this very moment.
That we're buddies and colleagues.